There is something happening to you that is more serious than you've been treating it. Not because your life is falling apart, not because you had a breakdown or a panic attack or some dramatic moment that forced you to stop and pay attention. It's more serious precisely because none of those things happened, because you kept going, because you adapted, because somewhere along the way, without making a conscious decision about it, you took the anxiety that used to feel like an alarm and you turned it into wallpaper. It's there every day, you see it every day, and you stopped seeing it at the same time. That is what I want to talk about today. And I'm going to give you the most important part of this right now, before anything else. Because if you walk away with only one thing, it needs to be this. The fact that you got used to the anxiety does not mean the anxiety got smaller. It means you got better at ignoring it. And those are two completely different things with completely different consequences. One of them means you healed. The other means the damage kept accumulating while you were busy pretending it wasn't there. The question is, which one is true for you? And if you're honest with yourself, and I think you already sense the answer or you wouldn't be here, you probably already know. Let's start with how this happens, because it doesn't happen in one moment, and it doesn't happen by choice. Nobody decides to normalize their own anxiety. Nobody sits down one day and thinks, you know what? I'm just going to accept that this is how I feel all the time and stop questioning it. It happens the way most slow damage happens. Gradually, through repetition, through the ordinary accumulation of days where the anxiety was present and life continued anyway. The first time you felt it, you probably noticed it clearly. Maybe it was a specific situation, a specific pressure, a specific fear that had a name and a shape. And it was uncomfortable enough that you recognized it as something wrong, something that didn't belong, something you wanted to fix. So you got through the situation, and the intensity faded, and you told yourself it was situational, that it made sense given the circumstances, that it would pass when things calmed down. And things calmed down, externally. But the anxiety didn't fully leave. It just got quieter. It lowered its volume just enough that you could function around it, just enough that you could stop thinking of it as a problem requiring attention, just enough that the next time it rose up, you had a frame for it already. You had the explanation. This is just how I am in stressful situations. This is just me. This is just what it's like when life gets complicated. And life kept being complicated because life is always complicated. And the anxiety kept finding reasons to stay. And every time you got through something difficult while feeling anxious, your brain logged that as evidence that the anxiety was manageable, that you could handle it, that it wasn't actually stopping you from living. And in one sense, that's true. You were handling it, but in another sense, the more honest sense, you weren't handling the anxiety at all. You were handling life in spite of the anxiety, which is a very different thing and far more exhausting. Here's what getting used to anxiety actually looks like from the inside, because I think a lot of people don't recognize it because they're expecting something more dramatic. It looks like waking up with a feeling you can't quite name. A tightness or a restlessness that's just there, that doesn't attach itself to anything specific, that you've stopped questioning because it's been there so many mornings that it no longer registers as unusual. It looks like a baseline level of tension in your body that you only notice when it briefly disappears. And when it disappears, your first instinct isn't relief, it's suspicion, like something is wrong with the calm. It looks like never fully relaxing in social situations, always monitoring, always slightly aware of how you're coming across, always managing the impression you're making even in the company of people who know you and love you. It looks like a subtle but constant low-grade vigilance that follows you everywhere, into conversations, into quiet moments, into the spaces that should feel safe. It looks like difficulty enjoying things. Not in an obvious way, not in a way that announces itself as a symptom, just in the way that good things feel slightly muted, slightly observed from a distance, slightly like you're watching your own life rather than fully living inside it. You're at the dinner, you're present enough, you're laughing at the right moments, but some part of you is somewhere else. Some part is watching the exits, cataloguing the potential problems, keeping one hand on the wheel even when there's nowhere urgent to go. It looks like being described by people who love you as someone who worries too much, and internally agreeing with them, and also not being able to stop, and having stopped expecting to be able to stop, and calling that acceptance when really it's surrender. That's what it looks like. And the reason it's dangerous is not because any single one of those things is catastrophic. It's because all of them together every day, for months and years, cost far more than the bill ever gets presented in one place. The cost gets distributed. That's the insidious part. The anxiety doesn't send you one enormous invoice that you can look at and say, yes, this is unacceptable, I need to address this. It charges you in small amounts, constantly, from dozens of different accounts simultaneously. A little energy here, a little joy there. A little of the quality of your relationships, a little of your ability to be present, a little of your physical health, a little of your sleep, a little of your confidence, a little of your sense of who you are underneath the managing and the coping and the getting through. And because each individual charge is small, you keep approving them. Of course I'm a little tired today. Of course I'm a little tense before that meeting. Of course I don't sleep perfectly. Who does? Of course I overthink sometimes. Everyone does. Every charge gets a reasonable explanation, and the total keeps climbing, until one day you look up and you realize you can't remember the last time you felt genuinely light. Not happy necessarily, not everything is perfect, but just light. Easy. Moving through your day without the background hum, present without the monitoring, resting without the vigil. And you can't even fully remember what that felt like, which is its own quiet kind of grief. That's the dangerous part, not the crisis. The slow forgetting of what it's like to be okay. The gradual recalibration of your baseline downward in such small increments that you never had a moment of clear alarm. Just the slow, steady normalization of a state that was never supposed to be normal. And here is what I need you to understand right here, in the middle of all of this, because it's the thing that makes the difference between reading this and feeling seen versus reading this and actually changing something. Anxiety is not a personality trait. I want to say that again because I think it gets buried under years of identifying with it. Anxiety is not who you are. It is not your temperament, your nature, your permanent emotional weather. It is a state, a learned, physiological, deeply ingrained state, but a state. And states are not fixed. They are not the permanent architecture of who you are. They are patterns that were established under specific conditions, that have been maintained by specific habits, and that can be disrupted by introducing something genuinely different into those habits. The reason this matters so much right now is that the moment you accepted anxiety as your identity, the moment you shifted from "I have anxiety sometimes" to "I am an anxious person," you stopped looking for the exit, because you don't look for the exit from who you are. You look for the exit from a room you're stuck in, and the reframe from identity to state, from personality to pattern, is what gives you back the ability to look for the door. You are not an anxious person. You are a person who has been in an anxious state for a long time, for reasons that make sense, that you can understand, and that you can begin to address. That's different. That's actionable. That's where the actual change lives. So let's talk about what maintains the state. Because understanding what keeps the anxiety running at this low, normalized level is the first real step toward actually disrupting it. The first thing that maintains it is avoidance. Not the obvious kind, not hiding under your bed or refusing to leave the house. the subtle kind, the small daily choices barely noticeable on their own, to navigate around the things that trigger the anxiety rather than through them. Choosing the familiar option when the unfamiliar one might have served you better. Staying quiet in a conversation where speaking up would have felt uncomfortable. Pulling back from something you actually wanted because the anxiety that came with wanting it was louder than the desire. Keeping things small and controlled and predictable because unpredictability is where the anxiety lives, and you've been managing your life to minimize the territory where it can operate. And avoidance feels like relief in the moment. That's why it persists. Every time you avoid something that would have triggered the anxiety, your nervous system registers it as a success, as safety, as the correct choice. And it learns, over and over, that the way to stay okay is to stay away from the thing. But what's actually happening is the opposite of learning safety. What's happening is your world getting incrementally smaller. Your comfort zone, that overused phrase that nonetheless describes something real, is not a static thing. It either expands or it contracts. And every avoidance contracts it slightly. And after years of small contractions, you look around and you realize the space you're living in is much smaller than it used to be. And you're not sure when that happened. The anxiety told you it was keeping you safe. What it was actually doing was keeping you contained. The second thing that maintains normalized anxiety is hypervigilance, and I want to spend a real moment on this because I think it's one of the most invisible and costly parts of the whole pattern. Hypervigilance is the state of being permanently slightly on guard, permanently scanning, permanently running a quiet threat assessment in the background of every situation. And the reason it's so insidious when it becomes normalized is that it feels like attentiveness. It feels like being a careful person, a thorough person, someone who pays attention, and in one sense it is, but in the sense that being sunburned is technically being warm. Yes, but the cost is completely disproportionate to the benefit, and staying in the sun longer doesn't make you better at handling warmth. Hypervigilance in social situations means you're always slightly reading the room rather than being in the room. Always picking up on subtle cues, shifts in tone, changes in body language, things that might signal disapproval or rejection or the approach of something difficult. And you are good at it. People who live with anxiety often develop a genuine acuity for reading others. But the reading never stops, even when there's nothing to read, even when the room is safe, when the people are kind, when there is genuinely no threat to detect. The system keeps scanning because it doesn't know how to stop. Because you taught it that stopping was dangerous. In work situations, hypervigilance looks like never fully trusting that you've done enough. Always going over things one more time, always looking for the thing you might have missed, the angle you didn't cover, the version of events where your effort falls short. Not because your work is bad. Often people in this state are highly competent specifically because the anxiety drives them to check and recheck and prepare and over-prepare. But the competence is built on a foundation of fear, and foundations made of fear have a specific weight. You can build a lot on them, but the building is exhausting in a way that foundations made of something more solid are not. And at the end of every day, the vigilance that ran all day needs somewhere to go. It doesn't dissolve when you get home. It comes with you. It sits at dinner. It gets into bed. It doesn't know that the workday ended because it was never actually about the work. It was about the underlying state that the work gave it a container to operate in. The third thing that maintains it, and this one is perhaps the most quietly painful, is the story you tell yourself about who you would be without it. Stay with me here, because this sounds strange, but it matters deeply. A lot of people who have lived with anxiety long enough have, without realizing it, organized their entire sense of competence around the anxiety. The preparation and the vigilance and the checking and the overthinking. All of that has been producing results. Things have been okay. You've been functioning. You've been managing. And somewhere in the back of your mind lives a belief, very rarely examined, that says the anxiety is why. The anxiety is what keeps you sharp. The anxiety is what stops you from making mistakes, from dropping the ball, from being caught off guard. The anxiety is what makes you good at what you do, what makes you a reliable person, what makes people trust you to show up. And if you let the anxiety go, if you really let it go, and who would you be? Would you still be as careful? Would you still catch the details? Would you still show up the way you do? Or would relaxing mean unraveling? Would peace mean not caring? This belief is doing so much work inside you that I want to look at it directly for a moment, because it is both understandable and completely untrue, and I want to show you why. The anxiety didn't make you competent. You made you competent. The anxiety attached itself to your competence and claimed credit for it. Those are not the same thing. The conscientiousness, the attention to detail, the reliability, the genuine care for the people around you, those are not anxiety. Those are character. Those are you. They existed before the anxiety took up residence in them, and they would continue to exist after. The anxiety is not the source of those things. It is a passenger in the vehicle of those things, and it has convinced you that it's driving. When people recover from chronic anxiety, and they do genuinely, this is real, they don't become careless, they don't become unreliable or thoughtless, or suddenly unable to perform. What they become is all the things they already were, but without the constant cost. Same competence, same care, different energy expenditure, less suffering. That's not a compromise. That's what was always supposed to be available to you. Now, let's talk about what disrupting this actually looks like, because we've been in the pattern long enough and I want to start pointing toward the door. The first move is the one that requires the most honesty, and it's simply this: you have to stop calling the anxiety normal. Not out loud necessarily, not in some formal announcement to yourself or anyone else, but in the quiet internal accounting of your own experience. You have to stop filing the tension and the hypervigilance and the avoidance and the background hum under just how I am, and start filing it under something that is affecting my life that I am choosing to pay attention to. That reframing is not dramatic. It doesn't require you to have a crisis or reach a breaking point. It just requires a decision, a small, honest, private decision that this is worth taking seriously. Not because you're broken, not because something is terribly wrong, but because you deserve a life that doesn't cost this much. And the first step toward that life is acknowledging the cost clearly, without minimizing it and without catastrophizing it, just seeing it. From that place of honest seeing, the second move becomes available. And the second move is to start deliberately, gradually, doing the things the anxiety has been steering you away from. Not in one enormous act of confrontation with all your fears simultaneously. That's not how this works, and it tends to backfire, but in small, specific, chosen moments of moving toward rather than away from. The social situation you've been finding reasons to skip. The conversation you've been postponing. The thing you want but haven't let yourself pursue, because wanting it comes with anxiety, and anxiety has been successfully arguing against most things that come with it. Start small. Start with something where the worst case is genuinely survivable, where the stakes are real but not enormous, and go toward it instead of around it. Not because it will feel easy. It won't. The anxiety will show up. It will make its case. It will list the reasons this is risky, the ways it could go wrong, the evidence from previous experiences where things were hard, and you will feel it. And you will go anyway. And on the other side of going anyway, your nervous system receives something it has not been getting, evidence that you can move through discomfort without the discomfort destroying you, evidence that your predictions of catastrophe were larger than the reality, evidence that you are more capable of handling the uncertain and the uncomfortable than the anxiety has been telling you. That evidence accumulates, and accumulated evidence is what changes a nervous system's predictions. Not logic, not motivation, not the decision to feel less anxious. Experience. Real, repeated experience of surviving and moving and continuing despite the feeling. That's what rewrites the pattern at the level where the pattern actually lives. There's something else that matters here, and I want to name it specifically because it tends to get skipped in favor of more practical advice. You have been performing okay for a long time. Functioning, managing, showing up, handling things. And the people around you have largely taken that at face value, because why wouldn't they? You give them every reason to. You don't show the cost. You don't show the internal effort that goes into what looks like ordinary functioning. You don't show the vigilance and the avoidance and the management that runs underneath everything, invisible, holding the whole appearance of calm together. And there is probably a part of you that needs someone to see it, not to solve it, not to fix it, not to tell you what to do, just to see it, to acknowledge that what you've been doing has been hard, that the effort was real even when it was invisible, that you have been carrying something significant in a very quiet way for a very long time, and that matters. That you matter, not because you kept functioning, not because you kept handling things, but because you are a person with a real inner experience that deserves to be seen accurately. I'm saying this because normalized anxiety tends to create isolation. Not the obvious kind. You may have plenty of people around you, but the quiet kind, where the real thing that's happening inside you is something you carry alone because you've gotten so good at not showing it that showing it feels almost foreign. And that isolation is itself a cost, because human beings do not heal as well alone as they do in genuine connection. And genuine connection requires some degree of being seen as you actually are, not just as the competent, functional, managing version you show the world. So part of what I want to invite you toward is not just the internal work of addressing the anxiety, but the external relational work of being a little more honest with at least one person about what it's actually been like inside. Not as a performance of vulnerability, not as an announcement of brokenness, but just as the quiet, real act of saying to someone who matters to you, "This has been harder than I've been letting on," and seeing what happens when you stop holding the whole thing alone. Let me talk about the body, because I don't want to leave it out. The body is where normalized anxiety is perhaps most honestly recorded, and it's also where some of the most accessible points of intervention live. When anxiety has been running as background state for a long time, it leaves very specific physical signatures. Chronic tension in the upper back, shoulders and neck, held so constantly that it stopped feeling like tension and started feeling like just the way your body is. A jaw that's slightly clenched more often than not. Teeth that bear the marks of nighttime grinding. Headaches that trace back to the same tight muscles. Breathing that's become habitually shallow, not dramatically, not in obvious gasping ways, but subtly, consistently, never fully reaching the bottom of the lungs in an easy, unguarded breath, and a digestive system that is more reactive than it should be, more sensitive, less forgiving, because the gut and the nervous system are in constant conversation, and a nervous system running on chronic low-level alert delivers that message to the digestive system every single day. None of these things individually scream anxiety. They each have their own reasonable explanations, but together they form a picture. A physical picture of a body that has been living in a state of managed tension for too long. And that picture is worth paying attention to, not as a source of more worry. You don't need more things to be anxious about, but as confirmation of what you may have been unwilling to fully acknowledge from the inside. Your body has been honest with you the whole time. It doesn't participate in the normalization. It keeps sending the signals, the tightness, the shallow breathing, the tension, the sleep, that doesn't fully restore. All of it is the body doing its best to communicate clearly through the channels it has available. And what it's been saying consistently and patiently for however long this has been going on is, this is not okay. We are not actually okay in here. Something needs to change. The practical response to this is not to add more things to manage. It's to introduce the opposite of tension, regularly, deliberately, not as a coping strategy layered on top of the anxiety, but as a genuine signal to the nervous system that safe is available. Deep breathing, not as a technique to deploy in moments of panic, but as a daily practice that literally retrains the respiratory pattern and communicates safety to the vagal nerve and through it to the whole autonomic system. Deliberate physical relaxation of the areas where tension is chronically stored. Slow movement, not exercise as achievement, but movement as decompression. Time in natural environments where the nervous system gets sensory input that is genuinely incompatible with the threat scanning mode. None of these is glamorous, none of them is dramatic, but all of them practiced consistently over time rather than deployed occasionally as emergencies, change the physiological baseline. And changing the physiological baseline is changing the anxiety at the level where the anxiety actually lives, not at the level of thoughts, but at the level of the body that generates the feeling before the thought even arrives. There's one more thing I want to say before we close, and it's the thing that I think makes everything else land differently. The anxiety got normalized because you are strong. I know that sounds like the wrong way to put it, but it's true. You adapted to it because you are someone who adapts. You kept going because you are someone who keeps going. You managed it, absorbed it, incorporated it into your functioning because you are genuinely capable of doing hard things. But strength that is never met with care becomes something else over time. It becomes exhaustion. It becomes brittleness under the toughness. It becomes the kind of resilience that looks solid from the outside and is quietly hollow in the middle because it was built entirely on pushing through and never on actually addressing the thing being pushed through. You don't have to be less strong to take this seriously. Taking this seriously is not weakness. It is the most precise, intelligent, honest use of your strength that is available to you right now. Because you have been using your strength to manage the anxiety, and it has been working, in the limited sense that you're still here and still functioning. But actually try to imagine, what becomes available when you use that same strength to actually address it, to disrupt the pattern instead of manage it, to stop spending energy on the elaborate system of compensation and avoidance you've built and redirect that energy toward what actually changes things. That's not a small shift. That's a fundamental reorientation of how your capacity gets used. And the people who make that shift describe something that sounds almost too simple to believe. They describe feeling more like themselves than they have in years. Not some new, better, upgraded version of themselves, just themselves, without the hum, without the weight of the management, without the distance between who they are and who they've been showing up as because the anxiety required them to perform okay rather than actually be okay. That version of you exists. It's not a fantasy, not an idealized goal, not some future self contingent on everything going right. It's the version of you that was there before the anxiety found its permanent address inside you. Still present, still available, just buried under years of normalization and the very sophisticated coping system you built around it. The dangerous part was never the anxiety itself. The dangerous part was deciding, without deciding, that this is just how it is. That it stopped being a problem because it became the background. That the alarm stopped feeling like an alarm because it's been ringing for so long. You hear it now, clearly. And hearing it clearly, seeing it for what it is, rather than for what you convinced yourself it was, that's not the end of something. That's the beginning of the thing that's been waiting for you to be ready to see it. The anxiety got comfortable in you because you stopped questioning it. Start questioning it, that's where everything changes.